We should be back on now. Good. Yep. All right. So, Dr. G, not only did I do some reading on your bio,
you did some writing.
I did some reading on your book, which is called Ebenezer.
He spoke of modesty earlier. I want you to know every word in this book has gone through his, I would have said pen or quill or feather, but that's electronic these days.
Never mind that. I want you to tell everybody what that word came from, Ebenezer.
Actually, it's a hobby of mine, and I had brought to a number of places the most improbable spots. When we talked about operating under a tree, I would at the end say, how is it that we were able to achieve anything here at all, and now it looks like it's going to be going on its own. And I took a stone, and this little stone had an inscription on it. I think you might be able to see the stone back here, because in each one of the significant places I have left that. And Ebenezer, a wonderful Hebrew word which means, hither by thy help I've come. And that is, look, what we've accomplished here, or what we may have been able to do just to survive here, is really not of my making, but perhaps of a number of attributions to both mortal and immortal powers that brought us this far. And at every time that happens, when we get to the point where we say, well, I'm surprised that we were able to pull this off, but, this is the limit to which we can go. The next time it's another level higher still. And that's what I try to explain to each of the students and participants, that it's like someone who's not run a mile to attempt a marathon. And you get to the end of the first mile and you say to yourself, well, I'm exhausted. I can't do another step. I've done everything I can. Well, no, wait a minute. I recognize this. I've been here before. What did I do then? Well, I sucked it up and kept on going. The next time it was 2, the next time it was 3. And before long, you say 2 miles to go, and then you arrive. I haven't yet arrived. That's the point. It's not we have achieved the ultimate. No, we are in progress, and we are going to continue that so long as we are able, with the help of every individual that's participating with us and the Almighty who may be empowering all of us. So together we are made better than each is, and certainly better than any one of us will ever be. So as a consequence, I really am grateful for the opportunities, and let's just push the next one to the next level.
Well, you just let slip a secret. How many Marine marathons have you run now?
Oh, the Marine Corps. As many as there have been. And it's exactly a week ago this evening that I'll be carbo loading for the 44th running of the Marine Corps Marathon. And so they're making a little special fuss over that this year, because I seem to be the last man standing. And I don't mean that the others aren't running. I think most of them are not breathing. So as a consequence, this means that they're making a little bit of an honorific about that. But the fact is, I have been running a little, and I also know that it's the running of the race and not the finish line. It's not the graduation, but the education. That's why they call it commencement. So after I finish this one, I want you to know I have an application already made out for the next one.
Oh, wonderful. Anyway, why don't you just pick a place here that is covered in the book?
How about if you pick one? You tell me what it is. Surprise me.
Well, big surprise. One of the ones that I think is quite remarkable is the South Sudan, because you landed right in there at the time the war was going on. And so not only was your mission underway, it was running into headwinds that I don't think you suspected. So why don't you give us a quick sort of...
When you say I ran right into the war, that was a pretty easy target to hit, since it's been at war rather continuously, largely on the basis of the fact that the North and the South are fundamentally different. The Brits have a habit of drawing lines along rivers and making borders where they look like they ought to belong geographically, not recognizing that probably your second cousin lives on the other side of the same river, but they are now in a different nation state. And so as a consequence, families are split. They did that remarkably by cutting a vertical and a horizontal line through Kurdistan, and 4 different nations got the Kurds, and we're still living with a few of those problems. In this case, we have a North and a South Sudan. They're fundamentally different in the fact that North Sudan is an Arabic-speaking, largely Islamic, industrialized nation, looking a lot like the Egypt from which it was separated some time ago by those British at the same time as administration. Those Brits, wherever you go, only a Scot or two is there to leaven them. Otherwise, they would be in more mess than we have now. As a consequence, the southern part of Sudan was, in the same way I just said, industrial, Islamic, Arabic-speaking. These are Bantu, pastoralist, and either Christian or pagan in the sense of fundamental animism. That means that they were not at all compatible in terms of their lifestyle and their substance. And the people in the South essentially have the worship of one being, and that being is bovine. They are cattle worshippers. And I don't mean by that just casually that they follow the cattle or have a cattle culture. They virtually worship their cattle because, in fact, if you ask what is the fundamental need they have for the cattle, is it because they eat them, or they pull a plow, or they use them for some other... No. Having them is important. It gives you power. It enhances you because you can look out on that herd and say, see me? See, I could get 3 brides with those cattle. It takes about 25 to 30 cattle to get an illiterate, nubile wife. And if they were educated, that is to say, could read and write, that would raise that cattle price considerably. So the dowry value is standing out in front of you and you're a big man. So what you're doing with your cattle is ensuring your own fertility. The cattle's fertility and the human fertility are interchanged that way, and so as a consequence, that value is something that is coveted by all. What does that mean? Well, now look, there's Fred's cows over there. He's going to sleep tonight, and he's only got a couple of sons and a couple of, grandsons and nephews, and they're, they get a little drowsy too when they're in cattle camp. So if we rustle those cattle, by tomorrow I can secure that bride down in the village that I've been after for a while, because her father, who may not even know her name, has been bargaining to get 20 to 40 cattle out of her. Well, if I can just get them over there, then they're out of my hands and I can get this nice 11-year-old that I've been looking at for a while. Well, before this time, this would induce a bunch of people who are friends of Fred's and his uncles and his cousins to pick up spears and to chase me down and try to get the cattle back. Well, all of that was then, and now it is now. And modernity came in the way of a machine that is indestructible. That machine is the AK-47, probably the most indestructible piece of modernity I've ever met. No one's got a watch or a radio or a bicycle, but they all have AK-47s. And they have them for reasons that are unique, not to them, but to the objectives of another agenda that are not even known to them. The Israelis are financing the checks to make the AK-47s that come down through another party to contain this island of Islam from the single piece of Christianity and animism so it doesn't spread any further. As a consequence, automatic weaponry is everywhere. In the bush, everywhere around. I can pick up a checkmate AK-47s in the grass. So every 10-year-old's got one, allegedly to protect the cattle from the lions and from the hyenas and everything. No. From cousins and uncles who want to bride wealth. And as a consequence, the lethality has now gone up exponentially. Now when you wrestle someone, you go over and rustle their cattle and bring them out. Instead of having Fred and 4 of his cousins come on over with spears and chase me down, what will happen is that 3 or 4 of them will come with RPGs and AK-47s and annihilate the village. So what has happened is that the lethality has gone up, and while I enter, I am in the middle of a shooting war which left bodies everywhere. And as I once wrote a note to the people there, I arrived, and on my first day, I went out early in the morning for a run, which is what I do at dawn. And they find that amazing because they say, doesn't he know? Are we worried about black mambas and hyenas and lions? No. There's cattle rustlers out there, and they are not very kindly disposed to any interruption in their activities. So I had gone out with this young lady who was a first-time traveler. Not only was she a first-time mission, she was a first-time anytime. She'd been on an aircraft for the very first time in her life. We actually had to drug her because she had gone to her sister-in-law's wedding, and that was the only trip she had made before this time. And the next thing she knows, she's on a single-engine Cessna 208 Caravan flying over the center of and dropping down into South Sudan. She had gone to a Catholic school and had a lot of friends, and what she had done in order to finance her trip, made a plastic bracelet. And the little plastic bracelet, the one I'm wearing right now, is that plastic bracelet, and she gave it to me at that time and haven't taken it off since. It says Mission to Heal on it. Anyone who gave a little donation to her, she gave one of those bracelets. She still had a bunch of them left. She and I went out for the run then at dawn, and as we were running along, there was this rather annoying sound, and the sound was that of automatic weapons fire. So she said to me, "We better run back." And I said, "We will. We'll turn here. Those are just hunters out shooting antelope," saying that rather carefully to make her less frightened about the whole thing. We then turned around and came down back, got ourselves back and dressed up and ready to go to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, there were 3 bodies in front of the entrance. What had happened is the Murley Raiders had come on down and had secured some cattle, and there were some women that had surprised them. They had killed a couple of them and captured one of them, and one of them they had speared, and she lay there with chest wounds, and they assumed that she was dead. She was not dead, and she was brought to us later, and she was the subject of a movie. And that movie was a documentary, and it was entitled We Are the Ones. And what we did to try to solve this problem is embedded in that movie. And the substance of it is as follows. When I sat down at the end of the day, there were 9 deaths during that raid. And I said to the people who were Dinka, I said, what is the purpose of my talking about malaria and tuberculosis and teaching your operations when your biggest health hazard is hostility? How about if we go see those Murley people that are killing you before you get started tomorrow on killing them, because they'd already rounded up a whole posse to go chase down the Murley to see if they could recover their cattle, but more particularly to get vengeance on the basis of the deaths they had experienced. And all but eight of the people that I talked to, all but 2 said, no, we don't have anything to do with those people except for killing them. And 2 of them said, well, I'll go with you if you go. And so we got that little Cessna and we flew over to the place, and it's called Pibor, which was the capital of the Murley people. And they'd all been brought together. They knew we were coming. They knew 2 of us were from different parts of the world. And they knew 2 of us were Dinka. Dinka were their arch enemies, their rivals. And so they were going to be sort of in this standoff truce, largely on the basis of the fact that there were 2 of us that had white skins and they didn't want to get into international trouble. And what happened is that the chief, the Murley chief, he looks comical. If this weren't serious, you'd start laughing, because he comes dressed 6'8", dressed in pajamas. He got that out of a mission barrel. That was his finest clothes, because the good people of this world think we're going to give this off to the folk over there. But the folk over here aren't 6'8" when they put those pajamas on. So they came about to his knees, and he's standing there in all seriousness, and he lines up everybody. And the other white person that I have with me is the cameraman from a crew that had come with me to see the filming of it before they realized that this was a major hostile interaction as well. So they lined up with me, and I took the bag, and Julie had given me the bag with her bracelets. And I said, would you raise your right hand? And I said, swear before God or Allah that I will not kill my brothers. And if they did so, I would slip the bracelet on their hand and say, if there's no blood on the bracelet, we will be back within the year to build a clinic. And you know you need the clinic, because you know well that the Murley people will be extinct within a generation. And why? It's because you have an infertility problem, largely on the basis of endemic pelvic inflammatory disease, such that infertility is such a severe problem among you that you're no longer rustling cattle, you're running over to the adjacent tribes and getting the youngest girl you can find, like a 7 or an 8-year-old girl, and waiting until she's able to conceive and saying, aha, at least I have a bride who hasn't contracted this venereal disease as yet. As a consequence, there's even more warfare going on back and forth. And I want you to say, I will not kill my brother. My brother is a Dinka, an Aware, any of the other tribes who is not Merle. Well, they all agreed to that on camera while the camera's rolling. And 6 months later, we very cautiously asked, what is the status in the Merle and Dinka feud? They said, well, on the other borders, as always, and there are like 2,700 casualties on the eastern border. In the west, around Pibor, we don't know, can't understand it, but there have been none. And then we found out that chief, that tall, gangly guy in the short pajamas, had gone around to his tribe, his sub-chiefs, and he said to his sub-prefecture chiefs, now this crazy white man that's promised us a hospital, remember, if one of you young bucks runs off and grabs a woman or a bunch of cattle, I'll snuff him. You can hide from me because I'm a long world away, but not from the paramount chief. As a consequence, they were frightened and did not carry on any raiding. So within that 6-month period of time, we came back with a container. And the container was a very interesting load of equipment because it was half designated for Workhawk, which was Dinka, and the other half for Pibor, which was Merle. And they all said, oh, that's good, because you, American professor, are going to be operating in Workhawk on Dinka. Then you'll come on over to Pibor and you'll be operating on Merle. I said, no, I'm a professor of surgery. I help and I teach and I enhance, but we have Merle trainees that were training in Workhawk in the Dinka stronghold. And we will take the Dinka fellows and they will be your physicians and surgeons right here in Pibor. Well, no way. I mean, you can't do that. No, I said, it's worked before. When I was in Rwanda, we took Hutu to the position of the Tutsi, and we said, these are your caregivers. Oh, no. But I said, I'm not here. These people will be. Well, okay, we'll hold our nose and come on in because we have such severe needs that we'll at least withstand that degree of animosity. And over time, that sort of smoothed out a bit. And so right now we have Hutu hospital staffed with Tutsi and Tutsi hospital staffed with Hutu. And that's in Rwanda. And over the next couple of years, it worked in Pibor and in Workhawk. That is not to say this was a panacea and it worked everywhere in South Sudan, because there are still a number of conflicts that are raging constantly because the cattle cultures are born into it. We talk about gun violence in America. That says nothing compared to the generations of shootouts that they have there over fertility. That is human and cattle, and they're intertwined. Ironically, I find this to be fascinating for another reason, anthropologically. If you accumulate a lot of cattle, that gives you great power and fertility, right? Not so fast. First of all, the cattle spread a feces veneer across the place, and they cause high infant mortality from the contaminated drinking water. Number two, the cattle have an organism that infests the placenta of the cattle, and that is brucellosis. The brucellosis can actually cause human abortion. As a consequence, the more cattle you have, the fewer children you're likely to bear, at least to get them out to reproducible age. So their own full speed ahead, don't ask me, it's a bit like money. Saying, if I have $1 million, no, let's make that $1 billion, I'll have infinite power. And pursuing those dollars obscures the reason that you were after them in the first place. So as a consequence, these people are really now worshiping their cattle rather than the means to which they were supposed to be directed. And I would like less cattle and a whole lot more of the human benefit, because the cattle are economic drones, number one. They pollute, number two, and they desertify, number three. In an area that's prone to droughts, they cause a lot of problems because they must migrate to water, and in doing so, they cross over. The largest development project in African history below the Suez and Nile was the construction of the Jonglei Canal. It goes from one area on the White Nile to another. cutting off this huge 1,200 kilometer loop of the White Nile as it's making its way to Khartoum, the conjunction of the Blue and the White Nile. At that point, 4,004 kilometers from Alexandria in the delta of the Mediterranean. The longest river in the world, the largest lifeline of Africa, has this industrial highway cut right across from Malabar over to Bor, and it would have shortened it, and you'd have ocean going. This was the idea of the north of Sudan, with the industrial north saying, let's industrialize the south and get those pagan folk that are out there killing each other over cattle to do something of value to earn wealth and to industrialize the area. And we'll bring down Egyptians who have too many people for limited land. Now we have all this land and no civilization. In other words, they were Islamicizing the South. This didn't go very well with the South for several reasons. The number one of which was not the Islamization of it. The number one of which is the Jonglei Canal would cut the cattle migration route to get to water at the time that the droughts occurred. So this canal was completed almost the second largest construction project in African history by an Anglo-American company with the largest digger in the world, Bucyrus Erie from Ohio, sitting there with baboons living in it, 5 miles from Bor, 2 miles from Wurkok, right where I was. It was blown up by John Garang, the head of the Sudan Liberation Army. So what had happened is that this was Africa 1, Civilization 0 for that moment, largely on the basis of time immemorial, the kind of thing that you would learn as an anthropologist that you wouldn't know as a professional, especially not as a political scientist, was not to be done. This was a development project that didn't take into account the long-term animosities of the people and the cattle culture at war. So I got involved in this, and that's one of the things I say about it. You can't go into something and say, well, it's perfectly obvious, simply do this and you get a good result. So that's the background against which we start our two Sudans. And even the U.S., which brokered the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, said at a given date we will have a plebiscite and we will vote to see whether the South wishes to remain a part of the North or whether it wishes to go independent. And the vote was held while I was there. It was a real close squeaker. 98.8% voted independence. Now, what does independence mean? It means we are no longer part of the North. Did it mean independent, we are generating our own income? Over 90% of the GDP is foreign aid. There is no productivity in South Sudan, and the war continues unabated because the primary reasons for it are not changed. The human fertility, based in the cattle fecundity, based in the migration on water sources and feed, all of it being a source of tribal clan warfare. So that there are formerly this large group of Bantu that was broken into the Nuer and the Dinka. They were once the same. Now their languages are different. That was just in the early part of what is history, a couple thousand years ago. And now there are Dinka Boer and there are Dinka Jonglei within the same piece of the province that are shooting at each other because, again, they're competing for the limited resources, and the most limited is the fecundity of women and the fertility of the cattle, or that which supports it. So that we're talking about something basic, fundamental, and primitive, now fought with automatic weaponry from the developed world, which has an agenda, not even knowing these people exist. And as a consequence, they're caught in the gears of this giant machine that they don't even know. Somewhere else, decisions are being made that affect their very survival. And they say, well, we're going to go it alone. Well, they can't go it alone. They're disconnected from the other parts of the world and therefore have no access to the economy of it. They're not part of the global market. So here we are trying to teach healthcare techniques to a group at war. It was not easy. It remains not easy. And the war continues on.
Wow. There are so many lessons to be learned there.
And all of them haven't been taken up fully, and not by me as well. So I have a lot still to learn as well. One of the things about it is not, do I have the answers? I'm just trying to work on a couple of reasonable questions. And the one-stop shopping, one-size-fits-all is clearly inappropriate. Here was an American brokered comprehensive peace agreement that said a plebiscite means all people are enfranchised and they all have suffrage. Women and children and adults all vote. Because that's our model. American democracy, one man, one vote is going to solve it. It didn't, because they aren't, in a way, Jeffersonian as we were as a democracy that got started. And let's not be too confident in that ourselves, because Jefferson didn't think one man, one vote. He thought one white man landowner male votes. And as a consequence, we've had to learn a lot of things, and we can say that learning curve wasn't easy over here. Now to say they should be up to speed because we've done all that learning for them, so let's just have them take our model, doesn't work. And I've learned some things that we are supposed to be doing as Westerners that we know pretty well are the best practices here. We have tried to develop Mission to Heal best practices for the missions. And what it means is listen more and talk less. Because what we can prescribe for you are a lot of mistakes you don't need to repeat. And to see that you have a civil war going on here over fertility, we can tell you, we know all about one man, one vote over here. That wasn't so easy either. We had a little thing called a civil war of our own, the greatest carnage ever seen in the Western world. And so our learning curve is no less smooth than yours. And as a consequence, we ought to come here and see what we can do to ameliorate around the edges, not to prescribe a single solution that will solve your problems. Because the one thing I don't want to hear from any politician, it's only politicians and physicians who would be so bold as to say this: I know what's best for you. You don't even know me. How can you say that when you don't have a clue about the culture and you don't know the circumstances from which I'm coming? So as a consequence, this is a learning experience. The Mission to Heal goes out there to learn as much as can be learned and carefully, maybe softly, make some suggestions, which the uptake can be according to their own pleasure, because in fact, we are only there to enhance the care that they are giving, not to take over. We are not colonial. We do not come to assume control of that population. That's up to you. And if you do it correctly, we will learn a lot from you. And if you want to learn the incorrect ways of doing that, here are a couple of mistakes that you need not repeat.
Wow. Dr. Geelhoed, I think we've got to have you back because we're starting to skirt on the subject of Africa, probably one of the most important continents in the world today, and where we are going. Because I don't think we are going in the right direction at all. It's pretty obvious from what's going on in the world today, but I'm only starting to feel that I'm just starting to learn what the issues are. And where we go from here is, boy, I can't think of anything more important other than maybe your mission to heal.
Well, thank you for that. You are obviously in the areas of the most important mega issues of our time. For example, global warming, trade, benefit that goes more evenly distributed across the human race, all of which are subjects almost too big for me to get a handle on from one side. So it's difficult to see the situation in which we live without looking at a little laboratory of the other. Now, I can go to South Sudan and start studying them and say, look at how foolish they are chasing their cattle, which are economic drones that give them no benefit and a whole lot of hazard. And then I go around to my garage It is so much easier to see
boy.
the problems they have and to accuse them of some stupidity, when in fact this is a reflection. And that's when we ask the people on return. The biggest change, of course, is re-entry, coming in this direction. Reflect on what you've learned from looking at the other. How has that illumined your own life process? And what have you decided is wrong with them, so that you can come back here and get quite smug about it before you run headlong into the front door and you say, oh my goodness, what am I doing that? And the consumption that I have that's not only conspicuous but absurd is causing perhaps more ripples than just that which affects the developing world. It's pretty well affecting me. So let's talk about the contamination of the limited supply of fresh water on Earth. Let's talk about what the air is doing. Let's talk about the soil fertility that's washing away, all of which you have a better handle on as an agronomist and a soil chemist and all the other pieces that went into it. And I haven't got those graduate degrees yet, but I have a catalog to look at.
Okay. Dr. G.
Good fun.
Right.
Thank you so much, Fred.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is I think that's pretty damn good for a first pass.
And I don't think we'll run out with our friend Joe. If he wants to push it a couple of hours, we can handle that.
Well, let's put it this way. Because we got a timer there,